Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at Act 2 of Arcane Season 2. Because this is going to be going up before Act 3 is out, I would love to know what your theories and predictions are, and I think it'd be fun if next week, when we do all get to see the end of Act 3, if we can kind of check in and see how many of our theories and predictions were correct. One thing I want to focus on, as it does have to do with the end of Act 2, and typically I like to go in order of events when I do these deep dives, but because I just watched it and all the emotions are really raw, and that scene at the end of Act 2 is at the forefront of my mind, I want to start all of this by somewhat touching on what I think is going to be a prediction, but it is rooted very much in the arc progression of various characters as well. I would love to be wrong about this. I think Isha is dead, and I hope that I'm incorrect about that. I don't think I'm incorrect about that, but regardless, her being put in danger and something happening to her, this person that Jinx obviously cared very much about, and Jinx felt like maybe she might want to live for something more than just surviving, and there's something outside of herself that actually allowed her to look inward. Because of this, you are going to see her now really fight for the cause. Something I've noted throughout all of Season 1 is the irony of the fact that for so long, Vi was the person that cared about the cause. You see a lot of that in Act 1 of Season 1. She talks to Vander about it. She wants to fight back. She has this sense of justice. And Vander is kind of trying to hold her in check and make her realize that you will end up losing a lot. Look at what happened to your family. There's always a price to pay. And if we can navigate things as peacefully as possible, that's what we should do. You see Vi, in a sense, grapple with that. And then when you have her enter back into the picture in Act 2 of Season 1, Vi very much doesn't care anymore. She just wants to get to Jinx. She wants to, as she kind of frames it, right the wrong, deal with the monster that she feels she created, meaning Jinx. So you see a lot of that within Vi. Whereas with Jinx, the irony is that she so badly wanted to have validation and to prove herself, to belong. We see all of these things within Act 1 of Season 1. When we get to Act 2 and Act 3 in Season 1, she still doesn't really care that much about the cause, but you are seeing how she kind of slowly is accidentally almost starting to represent it, just in this sort of flippant nature, and her trying to also prove herself. It's still rooted in her seeking validation in a lot of ways and just craving some kind of connection. You see all that with her connection with Silco, and in a way, by extension of what he wants, she ends up sort of representing the cause. And this all comes to fruition here in Season 2. She obviously has had an effect on the people of Zaun. They're dyeing their hair blue. A lot of them are modeling themselves after her. And even Isha is starting to basically be a copycat version of Jinx because she looks up to her so much. You have, of course, the funny scene where Jinx is like, oh, here's your big fat hero. She goes to rescue the people from the prison. But she is now becoming sort of the representative of this rebellion and this uniting entity almost for all of the people that are within Zaun. You even see Savika kind of talk about, we can all unite. The Firelights and the people that are following Jinx, the goons, which as I called them last week, the Abe Lincoln wannabes and the dominatrix. See all these people coming together, and Jinx is sort of their leader, despite the fact that she still ultimately doesn't want it. Where I'm going with all this, because this is a very long-winded way of saying, I think that in losing Isha, we are finally going to see Jinx truly commit to the cause. The creators have talked about how they plan to write other stories within this world, which is great. I think you're seeing a lot of setup within this season of Arcane for those future stories, but I kind of conceptualize, well, where is this going to end? What major story is going to be quote unquote complete by the end of Season 2? And I think it is the Jinx and Silco arc and what themes were tied to those things. As Silco was somebody who, and I can't wait to dive more into this within this discussion, but Silco was somebody who became so committed to the cause that eventually people meant basically nothing to him, and we'll touch on this later. But he was somebody who, he fought for the cause. There's that great quote where he tells Vander, you're willing to die for the cause, but you won't fight for one. This is his child, essentially, until Jinx enters the picture, and he becomes this parental figure to her. And then his entire cause no longer means anything really in the end when it means sacrificing Jinx. So he would have constantly found himself consumed by the cause until he was confronted with this realization that he has to choose, and he chose her. And in a sense, I feel like that was sort of the starting place that we began with this series, not necessarily Silco's origins, but it's where we started with Silco in season 1, and then we see this sort of reversal. Jinx is now left with what Silco left behind, sort of his legacy. She doesn't really want it, but you're seeing her rejecting the cause for so long, and then I think in the end, she is going to choose it. So it is sort of like this bookends, plural, to their arcs and what they represented and the ways in which violence propelled them, loss propelled them, the people in their lives propelled them. I think you're going to see sort of a completion of that. And I hope I'm wrong. I do not want, because at the end of the day, Silco ended up kind of sort of dying for the person that he gave everything up for. And I think that in a sense, you're going to see Jinx now die for a cause. And it's especially sad because I think even though she has Vi and, in a way, Vander in her life at this point, also don't know what's going to happen with Vander. But even though she has them, I think Isha was her anchor at that point, and now you're seeing her without Isha. It's almost like if Silco didn't have Jinx at the end of season 1, what would that have looked like? I think in a sense we're going to kind of see that with Jinx here at the end. So that is my prediction, and sort of touching on some things from the very end. Let's talk about the emotional side of it all, though. That was the most... I'm oh my gosh, I just started thinking about the imagery, and now I'm getting emotional again. It's like the bridge scene with Echo and Jinx, but to the nth degree. It was so emotional. I was like, what are they doing? Why do they hate us so much? Why do they hate kids? Why do they hate kids in this show? I feel like it's a lot of dead kids. It's piling up, you know? Anyway, so Isha, though, there's so much. I mean, this is a character that just has the occasional little giggle. There's not really anything that she voices that makes us care so much about her. It's just this little innocent child who looks up to Jinx, and obviously she sees a lot of herself in her, and they had to hit that home so strongly with the little hat, because in that scene I was just referencing with Echo and Jinx, you see when they were kids, the way they would play fight, and she had that little helmet, I'll call it, on as well. And then when you see Isha, the stark contrast in color use as well between how she's imagining all of this and being this hero and this being sort of this form of play versus the very ugly almost. I mean, the color use is very bland. It's like everything is being drained from the scene, and you see this little child running through that, but they're imagining, oh my gosh, I knew I was getting emotional talking about the scene, but I don't care because I know a lot of you are right there with me. But the color contrast was fantastic. This show has continuously used colors in such an amazing way. And also, they have utilized different art styles. I complimented that last week. They've done it multiple times within this act. Obviously, you see this sort of almost montage of the revolution starting, I'll call it. And then you see it here, but it's more rooted in a child's imagination. Obviously, there's a number of details that make this even more painful. There's the little motion that Jinx did to Isha during the very campy, fun Savika Smeech fight, where Jinx kind of looks at her and does like a little, pew noise, and she giggles at that. And then you see her do the same thing back to Jinx. And then also, I noticed before, and I'm sure a lot of people picked up on this too, but there's something specific I want to note. When Vi drops her gauntlets before going into this area where there's no weapons allowed, and obviously you see Isha looking and then realizing, I'm going to take those little hex gems from there. When they walk into the area, the way that she puts the hex gems in that little pouch of hers, it almost feels as though, I'm not saying I think this is literally what happened, but it almost feels as though the animators took Jinx, at the time it was Powder, when she was little, and the way she tucked things into that little pouch, it's almost exactly the same. The way she does it, the pouch itself, it's so similar. And it's such a random detail to include, but it just immediately foreshadowed trouble, because this is what kicked everything off. when you see Powder in season 1 having taken these hex gems and then it causes an explosion. So now you're seeing something that looks so similar and you just know. It's a really interesting way to foreshadow, to just have this one little innocent motion look so similar. And I knew at that moment, I think a lot of us were already worried about Isha because we're like, there's no way this kid is gonna survive. Also, we just have to further traumatize Jinx. So I'm sure for that reason alone, something's gonna happen to Isha. And she's cute, and again, she's a kid. So I think a lot of us knew. I was worried early on when you see her being a copycat. And I think that the writers, this was a clever way to pull at what you expected and then do something different and worse emotionally to us, which is that it seemed as though by being this copycat of Jinx that you were going to see Mbessa's man was going to capture her, or somehow something with Caitlyn would happen. And so I was worried consistently in those instances. And then you're kind of pulled into this false sense of relief and security when you see that those things didn't turn out that way. But then for me, it kept playing in the back of my mind like it's going to be her in trying to act like Jinx that's going to cause that. And I didn't expect that it was going to play out in the way that it did. So I think the subversion of expectations was very well done here. Man, where do we go from here? There's a lot to talk about. I mentioned before in referencing the parallels between Jinx and Silco, I mentioned that we would dive into something with him. And so I'm going to focus on that right now. We get a flashback with, finally, we get to see Vi and Jinx's mother. And we have this scene not just with her and Vander, but we actually see Silco there as well. We have this idea of there being this warped family where after the death of Vi and Powder's mother, I'm probably going to say Powder and Jinx interchangeably, but after we see the death of their parents, we see that Vander took them in. And just how much Vander knew them before and how much he knew their parents didn't really get elaborated on. And then Silco, we had no real indication. We obviously knew that him and Vander had some kind of past, but we didn't get much of an indication that he was in any way really that aware of or cared at all about Vi and Jinx. Within this flashback, it's clear that they didn't just all know each other. They cared very much about each other. And there was the potential for these two men to almost be like uncles to Vi and Jinx. But it goes by very, very quickly. But you see that apparently part of the flashbacks from season 1 that we would get between Vander and Silco, part of that was rooted in what happened with their mother. And you see him standing and he's there near the mother who has just died, which adds additional parallels to the idea that Vi became violent towards Powder after Powder did something that was in an effort to help that ended up leading to the death of their friends. And so now it kind of makes you wonder, did Silco go forward with something that then led to the death of one of their friends, meaning their mother, and that led Vander to become violent with Silco, and that's where this rift began. I think that is the conclusion, but there is another additional layer to this I want to note, is Silco looked horrified to see what happened to their mother on that bridge. That means that if I go back and watch season 1 again, that not just the Echo Jinx fight on the bridge, not that that's always going to get more and more emotional the more I watch it, but especially now that Isha also is modeled in some ways after Powder, but I digress. But when Silco finds her and he's panicking and he seems absolutely distraught, it's probably the most out of his usual cool, calm, collected demeanor that we ever see him. And then he brings her to the doctor. That scene for him must have been to see Jinx laying on that bridge. I can only imagine the flashbacks that would have caused him to when her mother was on that bridge. So many more layers. I feel like we're so probably, at least I know for myself, this is the case. I'm so kind of overwhelmed with all the emotions of what's happening in present day, but they have so many additional things that enrich the characters that they've already, some of which they've killed. Some of these characters aren't here with us anymore, and yet I feel even stronger for them, and that will make rewatching, I think, even better. There are additional things about that flashback scene we get. One would be the little detail of their mother having the cup with the straw in it. So obviously Jinx, you see in season 1 when she's Powder, Vander will serve her up a drink and it has a little straw. And even as an adult, she still gets her drink the same way. Silco has that sort of very large chunk of hair in the form of bangs, you could say, that hangs down in his face when his hair was a little bit longer. And Jinx obviously had that as well. I also want to zero in on something I think is interesting about Silco and him as a villain. He as a character was very consumed by his cause. He seemed like the person that maybe took the cause more seriously to some degree. Like Vander cared about it too, but I think Vander maybe always had this more emotional connection with the idea of caring for these kids. You even see him playing with them when they were younger. Whereas Silco, I imagine, this is me kind of filling in the blanks, but it is rooted in something that we do see play out. It seemed like Silco was more so concerned about making the lives of everyone around them better by making Zaun be liberated from Piltover. And as such, I don't know that he got to develop any real kind of connection, if any, with Vi and Jinx when they were little. So I think what's especially kind of captivating about all of this as a villain origin is that when she died, when their mother died, he did not come back for Vi and Powder at that time. He had to have cared about them to some degree, or at the very least he knew about them, and he would have cared about them because they were his friend's children. And I think for him, keeping his promise to her meant fighting even harder to make things better for all of Zaun, as opposed to taking care of her children who were left behind after her death. What's really sad, though, is that he became so consumed with this cause that if you look back at season 1, he's the reason that Marcus knew where to look for Vi and Powder, because he obviously starts making a deal with Marcus. He's trying to get this in. He wants to get back at Vander. His anger at Vander led him to do this. And this lasting anger, too, on top of course, I think him seeing a way to kind of get an in with somebody who was corrupt, and then he could kind of control crime and be left alone, all these things, have these bargaining chips. So he was laying out the groundwork. But at the end of the day, he should never have been okay with wanting to do anything to turn Vi and Powder over for what they did, especially because from his perspective, he probably doesn't care that they stole the Hex Gems or that they caused a little bit of commotion in Piltover. He doesn't care about those things. I don't think he's rooting for justice and for these kids to get taken down. I don't even think he really cared that much about finding a way to end the collective punishment we saw at the beginning of Act 1. I think he truly saw it as a way to get back at Vander for the violence that occurred after their mother died, and there was that sense of betrayal, which makes also the letter that Vander apparently was never able to give Silco, or Silco never found. It also makes that much more emotional, I think. But it really shows how much Silco kind of lost himself a little bit because he was willing to do this. And I think, interestingly, we always have parallels between Silco and Jinx, and we're always zeroing in on that. But in a sense, I think the idea of getting so consumed actually mirrors Vi a lot more, because you see, and it plays out in that sister fight that we get in Act 2 here, where they're talking about, what do you think they'd think of how their daughter is turned into a psycho? Jinx replies, which one? And they have this fight that it's a lot of emotional baggage coming out, physicality, of course, as well. But something especially cutting that Jinx ends up saying is that the very people, I'm paraphrasing here, but the very people that killed Mom and Dad, I'm sure they'd love to know that you became one of them. Vi, by caring about this concept, in her instance, I think it's somewhat like justice, righting a wrong. By caring so much about that, she ended up becoming something I think she would have been horrified to know that she was going to ever become. But also she did this in pursuit of Jinx. And Silco, again, to reiterate, he cared so much about this concept, freeing Zaun, that he was willing to have people basically sacrifice along the way, and it was Powder and Vi. Overall, the writing has done such a fantastic job of almost having like this enmeshed trauma across this family unit, we'll call them. We have spent a lot of time on more arc-oriented character dissection here. We'll go ahead and finally get back to the beginning and go in chronological order. So starting with episode 4, we kick off, as I mentioned, with this stylized montage of how Jinx has impacted the people. From this point, we do have this sort of, I can only imagine, for a lot of people, shocking moment where we see that Caitlyn and Maddie have a relationship together. There are a few things that could be going on here. One, it could just be an innocent relationship that has developed, although calling it innocence a little odd when Caitlyn is her superior, but there's a lot of things that go beyond lines, right? A lot of people cross lines in this show, so I don't know that we need to spend a whole lot of time dissecting, like, is this an appropriate relationship between these characters? Either it's they have a relationship and it's that simple, and maybe even had a relationship before, because it's very possible that Caitlyn and her had been seeing each other in the past, or maybe there was potential for them in the past and we just never really saw them because we didn't know this character. So it could just be a simple, they had attraction toward each other and then that played out as it did. It could also be that Maddie is somehow manipulating Caitlyn, whether by her own goals or through someone else. That is another idea. And then the third thing would be, if it was she is spying on behalf of someone else, who is she spying for? And it's possible it's Mbessa. I don't know, though, because I noted I wrote down when it seems Maddie is very comfortable just talking to Caitlyn. And Mbessa, I want to make sure I get the quote right, because it did amuse me. She said, "Quite the familiar face these days." And then I just wrote Mbessa, LOL, because say it like it is, she's not really beating around the bush there. And maybe it's just that Mbessa is really, really clever, and it's almost like Inception, where it's, I'm going to plant a spy, and then they're going to report back to me, and then I'm going to comment on the fact that this person seems to be around a lot, and I'm almost going to dismiss them in front of the person I'm trying to have them spy on. I mean, it could be that layered. It could also be, though, that she's perhaps a spy for the other group that is working against Mbessa, because if Mbessa has essentially recruited Caitlyn to her side, it would make sense that you would then get somebody. I would imagine those people know they can't get that close to Mbessa at this point, but if maybe one of the next closest people to her, if they can get close to her, then maybe they'll be able to keep tabs on her. I don't know, though. It could just be that they had attraction for each other, and that's that. So that's one of the things I'd be curious to see people's predictions on. Then we get a precious little interaction between Jinx and Isha, and I knew as soon as this was starting, I was like, oh no, they're playing and it's cute, and we can't have nice things in this show. There was something that I almost feel was super upfront, and it made me laugh a little bit at a moment that was kind of serious. But Mbessa and Caitlyn are having a conversation, and they're trying to determine what they're going to do, how are they going to deal with this whole Jinx problem. And at one point, Mbessa is clearly trying to manipulate Caitlyn. Caitlyn has a great line where she says, "Why is peace always the justification for violence?" And you're like, yeah, Caitlyn, maybe think about that a little bit. Instead of just throwing that out to your superior, actually ask yourself that tough question before carrying out certain orders, but I digress. As Mbessa is basically manipulating her, she's literally like stoking the flames, and I thought that was hilarious because it's such a almost overt way of being like, this is what Mbessa is doing literally and also emotionally to Caitlyn. We also check back in with the counselor Sallow, and he is becoming more and more desperate, and so it's suggested to him that he go visit this healer, which we of course know to be Victor. Oh my gosh, the Victor stuff. I'm gonna let myself get ahead of where we are right now, and let's just talk about Victor, please, because we need to. So I don't think Victor's dead. There's too much going on with the arcane and magic at this point to have this character just be gone. I also feel like there was so much being set up here. We don't really understand at all what even was occurring with him when he was in this other space. He seems more aware. I also have predicted that there is something going on with the people that he has made contact with. I don't really think he's gone because the arcane now exists in so many places. It's not just this contained thing. It has seeped into other areas, and I think he's a part of that. I used to wonder if Sky was a product of his imagination, or if it was magic forming itself into something that would convince Victor to do its bidding, if you will. But now I kind of wonder if Skye, in a sense, is in there, and that anybody who ends up becoming part of the Arcane is sort of in there as well. I mean, you do hear him, or you do hear all these voices when he first wakes up from being within the hex goo, I think I called it. But I don't really imagine that just because the physical form of him is been injured by Jace at this point, that means that's it for him. Also, even though I haven't played League of Legends, I just know that the people who have been fans of the lore for a long time had to be losing their minds when they heard the glorious evolution statement by him, because even I, as somebody who hasn't played the games, anytime there's any promotional material and Victor's there, people will have that quote. So I'm like, I can only imagine how pumped all of you are, and I am jealous. But yeah, there's no way, especially with all that is left unanswered, I feel that he is likely still here, and just the implications of it superseding, and just the idea of evolution being a huge part of what he is caught up within. I feel like he is basically understanding that, yes, I in my physical form have a limit, but my mind has no limits, nor does magic. And then you also hear how he is so disappointed in humanity, and it's humanity itself that is the reason that we can't have anything good in life, that we can't have peace and healing. And I definitely think this is the beginning of Victor as a villain, but we'll get to that. Point is, I don't think Victor's dead. And also, where we are in episode 4, Sallow is told, hey, you should go check out this healer guy. We do get back to Jinx. You see her having this monologue where she is debating what she should do, and she's recognizing she actually doesn't know that she wants to even be a part of this fight, because for once in her life she actually has somebody that she cares about. She has a friend, and she doesn't really want to risk all of that. And then that's when, because you're kind of wondering the whole time what's in front of her, and the chair spins, and it's her continuing to speak to Silco. Additionally, we also see a product of how things have changed by looking at the mural, and we see Echo is on this mural. Echo is gonna come back in Act 3, and also he better save the day and he better live. As tensions are rising, you see Savika deciding, even if Jinx isn't going to do something, I at the very least can try to rally everyone together. I really feel like Savika is a character that almost goes under the radar because she's not the focus of the story. She is, I would say, more traditionally a side character. But something I think that indicates a side character is done really well is when you just continuously find yourself wanting to know more about them. I really do want to know more about her. And at this point, I'm kind of like, maybe Savika should just lead the revolution. I did have a little bit of a moment of, aw, man, when her arm, somebody ends up piercing it, because I thought, she just got that. And it was fun, but we're done with the fun, apparently. We can have no more fun things for the rest of the show, it seems. So they took her cool arm from us. Hopefully she'll at least get it back to some degree, or get another new arm. I don't know. But I was kind of... I very much enjoyed the fact that that wasn't enough to keep her down. She's just going around headbutting people and everything, and I'm just like, aw, man. I'm not gonna lie, this is part of why I feel like she's gone up for me, is, you know, the cool factor. However, she is injured. Things do not go well. All these people end up being arrested. Savika reports this to Jinx, and this is one of the first times we get a very notable reaction from Jinx in the ways that we would see frequently within season 1. And it is devastating to me to see that now Silco has become part of these moments for her. It's not just her friends anymore, but him as well. I have been saying ever since they foreshadowed Hound of the Underground with Vander in season 1, I knew that this was coming, and I am upset about it. I still can't get over it. But regardless, a detail that once we have all these people arrested and the doctor ends up cutting himself so that the blood, you can see Vander go after him. When you sort of get into his vision, there is a moment where he stops and he looks at the statue of himself for a moment, and then he continues on, and I'm like, no. I feel like if you knew that it was coming, then that detail stands out, but if you didn't, then you might not have caught that. But I'm just like, gosh darn it, why? Why do they have to, really truly, why are they doing this to us? I hate it. Stupid Jace. Everything comes down. I feel like Jace just ruins everything. Everything. whatever, we'll get to Jace. Stupid idiot. The whole prison section was done, I think, really well. There was a little bit of humor. It had that sort of heist feel to it, which was a lot of fun. And then, of course, it had the more serious moments. You have this big emotional revelation. But something that I wrote as I was seeing Mbessa getting ready to deal with whatever was coming on one of the trains is that we need an Mbessa-Savika fight, right? I feel like a lot of this show is imagining who's going to cross paths, and will they be allies, will they get along, or will they hate each other, and will they fight? And I'm like, I need Savika and Mbessa to fight in Act 3. Please give at least that to me, and also, I need Savika to win. Just saying. I really like the formatting parallels that you get between the way that the acts played out in season 1 and how we're seeing them play out here in season 2. As an example, with Jinx, at the end of Act 1 in season 1, she's Powder at this point, and you see that she has been both physically and emotionally hurt by somebody she cares very much about, meaning Vi. Vi was coming back. I always feel like the need to emphasize this. Vi intended to come back for her, but Marcus took her and ended up arresting her, putting her in the prison. She never had any forms or formal documents or anything like that, so she couldn't get back to Powder, but she always intended to. But regardless, for Powder in that moment, she's essentially left behind. And then you see something similar with the end of Act 1, where Vi is both physically and emotionally hurt by someone she cares about, meaning Caitlyn, and then that's where you leave off with her, and you don't really know what's happened to Jinx. And in a similar fashion with the episode 4 structure, the entire episode 4 of season 1, you are constantly wondering, where's Vi? What's going on with Vi? And you see her at the very, very, very end. And at the very end of that episode, it happens to be in the prison. So I kind of like that the prison became a focal point in the setting within this episode of season 2. But on top of that, you once again are wondering, where's Vi? And she doesn't pop up at the end of this episode. So they subverted the expectation a tiny bit. She does appear in episode 5, but you know, I just like that we were absent Vi pretty much for the entirety of episode 4 for both season 1 and season 2. So on that note, episode 4 ends with this moment between Powder and Vander. But then we kick off episode 5 with Vi in her pit fighting phase. And I wrote in my notes, let's go. I was ready, even though we already saw this, right? So many of us waiting for season 2 already got a lot of pit fighter Vi, and we were pumped about it, and it pretty much played out exactly like it did in the trailer. And then Jinx shows up, and then we progress. But when Jinx showed up, I put in my notes, reunion, ... yay, this is sad. I was really bummed. I was bummed because we've wanted for so long for these two to come together and to have something. We were so close in season 1 when Vi finds her and then the Firelights show up, and we've just had so many moments where we're so close, and then here it's like Vi's broken down. In some ways there's some similarities to how she sort of secludes herself and how Jinx does, where they both go into these very small spaces, which could be products, of course, of their settings, because I can't imagine that Zaun's necessarily known for having these great big penthouses or anything like that. But you see that they almost go into like these little dark places when they're trying to deal with trauma, and both of them now have their broken mirrors. But you see Jinx show up and she's like, hey, Vander, he's in trouble. And I'm like, what are you doing to Vi? Why are you doing this to Vi? This is terrible. Jinx too, of course, but the two of them, come on. They need a break. They don't get it, though. They fight each other when they're in these tunnels, and you see Isha gets hurt. Jinx runs to her, and this sister fight I already kind of touched on. It was done so well. It not only had the characters airing their grievances with each other, then getting physical with each other, it felt cutting in a way that I feel like only family members or people you're really close to can be cutting. So I thought it was done exceptionally. We do segue from them into getting an update on Caitlyn. We obviously see that the doctor is still in the prison. I did think it was kind of interesting that he sort of just locked himself back up and then stayed. So you do kind of wonder often, what are his grand plans? Obviously he wants to protect his daughter, and we have had foreshadowing of this since season 1 with the locket. But I still don't really know his plans overall, and I am wondering if we're going to get a lot more of him in future seasons that focus on different characters. But regardless, He is now being held by Ambessa and Caitlyn, and Caitlyn's trying to intimidate him. Ambessa's trying to intimidate him. He has a great quote because Ambessa is like, oh, I know how these things go. I'm telling you, you're going to break. And then he says, no one in power is innocent. That's the thing that he knows as a fact. I did bounce around a tiny bit. There is also something that we haven't touched on just yet, which would be whatever is going on with Mel. As soon as her brother spoke, I did think, oh my gosh, is that her brother? Kino is his name. And then very quickly I thought, I don't know if this is her brother because things appear strange here. And I feel like some of the way that they're talking and even the way he looks, you would think he would look more disheveled. This area seems so odd and I have no idea. I'm sure some people that are familiar with the lore have a little more insight into this, but this is one of those things that I'm happy to just say, like, I'll watch and find out. Returning back, though, to Vi and Jinx, within the flashback scene, we already went over that quite a lot. One additional thing that I want to compliment, though, is how perfectly the actor matched Jinx's cadence. That was exceptionally done. And then also the way that they made their mom look so much like a mix of both of them. And I'll note, a little bit like Caitlyn. And then finally, we have a happy moment. Likely the only happy moment we're gonna get. When Vander is able to embrace Vi, and then Vi's like, get over here, he's your dad too. Ah, it's so good, it's so good. And then little Isha runs over, and they all have this big group hug, and you're like, can we just stop here? Just stop here. Everybody lived happily ever after. Let's do that. Except for that wouldn't be a very interesting or good story, and that'd be a really weird place to end. But still, we finally have these moments where you're like, maybe everything's gonna be okay, except for I don't feel like it is, and definitely not now. They've already burned me. And we know with how this stupid act ends that things don't stay great at all. But at least we had this hug. The last few things I wrote for this episode, I said, oh, Jace looks cool. And then I said, Victor's powers are interesting. And then I said, where's Heimerdinger and Echo? And then after that, I said, well, okay then. And that's how I ended episode 5 in my notes. And then that leads us into episode 6. And I kind of carried on with the what sort of notes. I wrote, don't know what's going on, but it's awesome. And then I said, don't hurt Vander. I was really worried. I'm still very worried. And then I said, please heal him, please. So to recap what's happening in this moment, they get the idea, having heard about Victor, to bring Vander to him, meaning Vi and Jinx and Isha. This is where everything starts to build, and you see these really heartbreaking moments, heartbreaking in hindsight, between Vi and Jinx, where one of the moments is when Vi says, maybe we can stay, and Jinx says, we? And you're like, oh my gosh, why can't you let these sisters just move? That's the conclusion I came to before, is move. You know, like, steal whatever you gotta steal, get your money. I just want you to find some random plot of land, and the two of you can build a house and be cozy, and she can tinker, and you can hunt or something. I don't know, but I just need them to be okay, and they're not. They're not okay. So, they come to this area where Victor is, and they bring Vander in hopes that he can be healed. Victor seems very passionate about trying to heal Vander, and Victor's motivations at this point also still seem very good, and that's what is so unsettling about everything that's happening. We do see Jace with Sallow. He kills him, and then he is on his way. I have no clue what's going on with him, but if I had to make a prediction, it would be that I hate Jace right now, but possibly he saw something in the Arcane that led him to believe or see a path that Victor was going to go down that would be very dangerous, or if not Victor, then the Arcane itself. And as a result of that, he's trying to eliminate the threat before it can actually fully form. But in the meantime, it kind of looks like Jace showed up and was a complete moron. That's what it looks like. Right now, I'm like, Jace, number 1 on the hit list for this show, like more than Ambessa. What the heck, man? But I think there's more to it. And again, I don't know if he's being controlled by something, manipulated, he doesn't actually have a firm grasp on reality, or he saw something and he's actually the hero. I guess tying this back to a potential prediction, I do not think a lot of this is going to get resolved within this season, and I wonder if in a future season you're going to see Victor is going to play a huge role in a plot line, and then also Jace is going to play a role, and you're going to see where Victor goes, and you're going to question if maybe what Jace was doing was actually right all along, but we don't see it right now because all we see is all of the chaos that he has created in this act that he had. And also, I wrote in my notes, take his stupid weapon. They keep telling everybody, like, oh, no weapons allowed in here, no weapons. And then Jace shows up and is looking all kinds of confused and not well. And people are just like, oh, here, this way. And you're like, what are you doing? But then that makes me wonder, because I'm like, I don't feel like nobody would tell him, like, hey, drop that giant weapon. So I'm like, does Victor also know something? Is it a matter of, like, he's allowing Jace and these people were almost even guiding him because Victor wanted this interaction? Because am I the only one that thinks it's odd that nobody was like, hey, stop, what are you doing, fella? Put that down. I feel like somebody, because they do it to everybody else. So it feels like maybe Victor also saw ahead. And maybe Victor wanted this? And maybe Victor was even controlling Jace to some degree, sort of, through the Arcane. I don't know. I even wrote, though, way before this moment, as soon as the characters were having some semblance of peace, and little Isha's bringing Vander some water in her little hat helmet thing, I wrote my notes, Jace is gonna mess this up way later. I have a line connecting that to a note further down that says, no! After accurately predicting that Jace would mess everything up, I did write in my notes a fantastic quote from Victor, which is that knowledge is a paradox. The more one understands, the more one realizes the vastness of his ignorance. Mbessa, though, does show up, as does Caitlyn, and I knew immediately when Caitlyn and Vi ran into each other, I was like, oh, this is not actually playing out the way they're making me, or they're trying to make me think. I think it's relatively clear that this is a setup. It did prove to be a setup, and it was fun for once to see Mbessa outwitted, outsmarted, and there was a chance that things were going to go right. You get that terribly emotional moment where Vander protects Jinx and says, don't touch my daughter, and then Jace messes everything up. And then obviously Vander is no longer really able to control himself as much. I don't know if what happened to Victor means that there's no little bit of Vander left anymore, or if there's maybe some, but not enough to where we can really see Vander in the place that he was where this episode started. But the last quote that I thought was very eerie was from Victor, where he says, the reasons for our failures, humanity, our very essence, which is a fantastic villain quote. So I do imagine that he is going to go in that direction. It is kind of weird, though, that I'm like smiling as I say it, because I mean, he's just a fascinating, interesting character. But then you have that very devastating scene that we have already discussed, and that I don't think I can touch on and discuss again, because we already did 1 and 2, because I can't get all emotional all over again. So that's it for Act 2. I'm sure I missed plenty of things, so of course feel free to elaborate on anything or to just add things I didn't touch on. This act was great. I can see, maybe because of how much it's leaning into the more fantasy sci-fi elements, I could see some people maybe missing when it was a little bit more grounded, I'll say, or a little bit more character focused and it wasn't getting into these abstract things. I still think we get character moments, of course, but I think it's moving very quickly, and it's really reaching very intense stakes very quickly. And I know for a lot of people, they kind of prefer that more intimate, close, and more locked in type of story that feels a little bit more, when I said grounded, I mean grounded in reality. So I understand if maybe it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but I am very invested. I'm loving it. I'm very nervous for Act 3. I don't think that in any capacity we're going to get a happy ending. I really don't think anything's going to be happy for anyone. There might be a few bittersweet things, but at the end of the day, I don't think that this is going to play out particularly well for all parties involved. And I also don't think we're going to get many answers anytime soon for certain events within this. But I look forward to Act 3. And I look forward to discussing it with all of you and seeing your thoughts. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.